anytime. This is CNN.
Hello and welcome to our Thursday show. The dangers of AIDS were brought home for students at a small high school in northeast Texas after 6 teens tested HIV positive, leaving the students and townspeople in shock.
No longer do we need to stick our head in the sand and say, hey, there's no problem. It doesn't affect us because it affects everybody.
Can it really happen anywhere to any one of our children? Dr. Barbara Starrett says yes, all it takes is one night of partying and one carrier. She's an internist at New York St. Vincent Hospital who specializes in AIDS patients. Also with us today is AIDS educator Frances Kunreuther. She works with HIV-positive teens as executive director of the Hettich Martin Institute. But first, we're going to hear from a teenager to whom it happened. 18-year-old Jennifer Michelle was diagnosed as HIV positive when she was just 16. Jennifer says that knowing about condoms might have saved her life. She now helps educate other teens about safe sex and the risks of AIDS as co-chair of Los Angeles Youth HIV/AIDS Conference Planning Committee. Welcome to all of you. Jennifer, how did you find out that you were HIV positive?
I was placed into a group home through the Orange County Social Services system, and one of the things that they routinely do is test all the youth that come through for HIV as well as many other things. It's a routine physical with all blood tests. And I had no idea what I was being tested for, really. I just knew that when I went back to the doctor's office, my family was there and a lot of people from the county, and I found out that I was HIV positive, and it was very shocking.
I gather you were not symptomatic. At the time that you had sex, did you think about consequences? No, you're not symptomatic now, is that correct?
Yeah.
But the time that you had sex, did you think about consequences, about pregnancy, about the possibility of AIDS?
The only thing that I really knew about was pregnancy, and I was a little concerned about that, but I didn't know about condoms, and I didn't know that that was a way to protect myself because that wasn't one of the things that I was taught in sex education.
Why did you have sex?
Partially peer pressure, I guess, not living in the home. I was a runaway.
And your parents, how have they dealt with this?
Since my mother's found out, she's been very supportive and helpful. She's been very caring. We talk all the time about it. And my grandmother is also very supportive and very loving.
Did you go to the boy and discuss it with him?
He's also a part of the social services system, and I haven't been able to find out where he was placed or what group home because all of that information becomes confidential. And I tried to get through. I didn't know the exact person of whom it was. There were several people that I would have to contact, and it was made very hard for me to do so.
So it is possible that there's a young man out there who is also asymptomatic, who's HIV positive, and who may very well be infecting other females.
Yes, that is very possible.
Dr. Starrett, is this a new story to you in any way?
No, it isn't, and I think we've always had this concern since the beginning of AIDS. I mean, as soon as we knew that it was a sexually transmitted disease, we had to worry about young people getting it. And unless you teach forms of disease prevention,
But we feel so safe, Dr. Starrett. I mean, really, we don't look at our kids as kids who are shooting up, certainly not suburban kids. We don't look at a kid like Michelle who could possibly come in contact with a young man who is HIV positive. We're not even sure they're having sex, and I'm not sure we want to know.
Okay, I'm giving you 3 very quick. Freshman NYU student, very, very wealthy family, young man, during summer vacation, partied, shot drugs twice. Was it a hip party, peer pressure, probably shared needles, HIV infected. 1992, he's still healthy, but 9 years ago. He's a good kid, white, upper middle class. He partied one night, peer pressure. Young woman living with a nice Jewish medical student becomes HIV. The young medical student comes down with PCP pneumonia, which isn't diagnosed for several days because here he's living with his girl. He avoids to tell anybody that he had some homosexual experiences. Girl number 3, second boyfriend. The boy is a law student. She's first year in college. He does not tell her that he shot drugs when he was a high school student and going through whatever. She's HIV positive.
Frances, it would seem to me that listening to this, abstinence is the answer, that the idea would have to be, you're an educator for young people, that you look at them, you shake them as best you can, and you say, don't you know that you could die as a result of this?
But, you know, it's funny, you started saying, how could this happen? How can this happen? It doesn't seem like it would affect my child. And I think so many parents feel the same way. It couldn't affect my child. I live in a nice community. I live in the suburbs. I live in a rural area. I'm not part of those inner city families that are at risk. But what we're learning is that all young people are at risk, that young people are engaging in sexual behaviors. When over half the young people in the United States are having sexual intercourse by the time that they are 19, it is only moral for us to teach them how they can protect themselves. To say abstinence really sentences them to death, and that's something we don't want to do.
Jennifer, how do you feel about that? I mean, as you go out and you talk to young people, do you say to them, stop having sex, or do you educate them about the risks of having sex and then tell them how to try to prevent disease and pregnancy?
Yes. I'm very into educating them about the risks, about the things that can happen. I believe that a lot of kids were in the same position I was and didn't know and weren't educated, and I'd like to see that changed. I'd like to see all kids...
But why not just stop? I mean, I'm curious to know why there seems to be such a resistance to even hearing that message.
Since the beginning of time, kids have been curious about sex, and that's not going to change. If over half of kids are having sex, you can't just say no and they're not going to do it. You have to teach them how to protect themselves and how to do it safely, or the kids will die.
I think that there's another issue involved, which is it's more than just teaching young people about HIV and sexual behavior. It's looking at the whole young person's lives. What sort of opportunities do they have in their life? What are they doing after school? Where are their parents? Are they getting the care, attention, love, and boundaries that they need as teenagers? It's normal for teenagers to experiment in different ways. We know it through driving fast. I mean, that's been years of doing that they take risks. That's part of normal adolescent development. But isn't there something in our society that has now dropped down the age of virginity to 10? I mean, there was a time in which you never even considered having sex when you were 14, 15, 16, maybe 18.
I don't think that. I mean, I graduated from high school in the 50s, and in my graduating class, there were other classmates who were pregnant. So people have been having sex in adolescent years for...
So you don't see anything contemporarily that's going on that's pressuring kids
I think there's now there is a more openness towards sexuality. I mean, look at our presidential candidates. Their entire sex life is being brought out and is very important news. So let's, you know, we can't play two sides of the story. We can't be interested in going to a movie where we're seeing all these sex scenes and then wanting to know about the sex life of all our politicians and movie stars and then tell our teenagers, who are the greatest risk takers.
That's true.
You can't, abstinence. And yet you show everybody else having wonderful affairs.
Jennifer brings up another issue that I had not stopped to think about until, frankly, she just brought it up, and that is that the issue of confidentiality works both ways. I mean, for heaven's sakes, I can see where in this little Texas town that there are a lot of kids who are not HIV positive who are going to be looked at and scorned and put aside because everybody wants to know who the 6 kids are. On the other hand, how do you feel about the fact that your child may be dating one of those 6 kids who's not going to end up being responsible to your daughter?
I think that when you talk about confidentiality, the reason we have confidentiality laws has to do with the enormous discrimination that people with HIV and AIDS face. I think that Texas is such a great example because already they're saying we don't want to come near this town, we don't want to be near these people. What you need to do is educate people about what HIV and AIDS is, how they can prevent it, how they can get it and how they can not get it, and also to talk to them about the issues of discrimination. And I think you bring up an important point. We want to inform people, but we have to protect people as well. It's always very complicated.
We're talking about teens and AIDS, and obviously this is a topic that I fear is the tip of the iceberg right now. One town in Texas is not going to be the end of it. 212-643-0077. We welcome your comments and questions.
After a 45-day ban, new evidence reveals what some call a lengthy cover-up on the safety of silicone breast implants. Are they as dangerous as critics say? Implants, new image, new worries. On World News, tonight, 10 Eastern.
We are talking about a very difficult subject. It's teenagers and AIDS, and we're talking with 18-year-old Jennifer Michelle, who is HIV positive, Dr. Barbara Starrett, an internist at New York St. Vincent's Hospital who specializes in AIDS patients, and AIDS educator Frances Kunreuther, who is executive director of the Heydrich Martin Institute, an outreach program for HIV-infected young people. Let's go to Jane in Virginia first. Hi, Jane.
Hi, I just have a comment. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and I've taught her that when you begin having a sexual relationship, the whole relationship focuses on sex. So to develop healthy relationships, you need to not do that until you're married, hopefully. And I would not trust my life to a little thin piece of whatever the material is for condoms.
Latex. Okay. Well, I'm curious to know how you feel about that, Frances.
Well, I think that it's very important that adults and parents teach their youngsters the type of morality that they feel is appropriate. But I also think it's important that youngsters find out how to protect themselves in case they do have sexual relations. What we find is most youngsters do not tell their parents if they're going to have sexual relationships, if they decide to have sexual intercourse, because they don't want their parents to know. They don't want to disappoint their parents. They care about their parents. And although they want to do the right thing, they may find themselves in that situation, or they may want to be in that situation. Therefore, I think it's extremely important we teach them about condom use and about what that little piece of latex. I think it's a good word for it, but it does prevent HIV infection, and it does save lives. I think what's the most moral thing is to save young people's lives, and we must keep that foremost in our minds at all times. We don't want to sentence them to death.
Jennifer, what do kids ask you?
A lot of them ask me how I can deal with it. Do I still have relationships and many things like that? And I explain to them that I still go on with my life as normally as I can. The only difference is now I have the power to help and educate people, and I'm trying to use that as best as I can.
Well, let's ask you those two questions. How do you deal with it, and do you have sexual relationships?
Yes, I do have sexual relationships, and I always inform my partner, and I allow them to make the responsible decision. And as far as dealing with it, I live in Glass Gay and Lesbian Adolescent Social Services group home, and they're very supportive of me. I get any counseling that I need there. The kids there are wonderful, and they help me all the time. I can talk to anybody freely about it. I'm in a very supportive and caring environment. I think that's my best way to deal with it.
Let's go to Stephen in Washington. Hello, Stephen. Stephen, you're on the air.
Yes, hello.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm an 18-year-old teen, and I have oral sex. I want to know how much at risk am I?
I believe that oral sex is not a good way to spread HIV infection.
It's not an efficient way to
spread
an
efficient way.
The disease.
Obviously, if someone has bad gum disease, if there's biting
But it's
involved,
not impossible to spread the disease that way.
Well, you know, I think the biggest problem with HIV transmission is that you probably could invent situations where anything would be possible. The question is, we've got to look at reality, what really happens, and some theoretical basis.
Okay, so you have Jennifer
so I would
Michelle
tell
who
people
talks
right
about
now that oral sex without is very, very low-risk behavior.
We have Jennifer Michelle who just said that she has relationships. She tells a partner that she's HIV positive, and she is willing to have sex if the partner is willing to have sex.
With condoms.
I'm going to assume that that's the case.
Yeah.
I don't think she would have brought that up if it weren't. You are the mother of the boy that she is having sex with, and he has come and told you about this. You're also a specialist in AIDS. I want to hear your response to that.
Well, first of all, the male, insertive male, is very low risk because the tissues that are exposed during sexual contact are not good for receiving the AIDS virus.
So he has a lowered risk.
Okay. He can't get pregnant, but he might get exposed to AIDS.
And?
The AIDS virus, or HIV virus.
So what would you tell him?
What I would tell the person is that.
The person, your son.
I would tell my son that he would as long as he used condoms he was safe.
And if she were a he, would you say the same thing?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Let's go to Connie in Kentucky. Hi, Connie.
Yes, my question is, aren't we misleading our youth by giving them the impression that AIDS cannot be transferred through blood exchange? For example, the young patient that was infected through the dentist, and that had nothing to do with the latex condom.
Mm-hmm. Frances, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think that those sorts of incidents are very rare, and there were certain particular circumstances with the dentist. But I do think what we need to teach young people in terms of blood exchange is about needle use. There are young people who share needles through drug use, and I think that that's an extremely important point. And I think that you don't know, 1.2% of high school students have used a needle sometime for drug injection during their high school experience. We tend to gloss those things over. We tend to put them under the rug. Again, it's not my young person. It's not my daughter. It's not my friend that's doing that, but it is. And we need to help these young people and teach them how to be safe.
Dr. Starrett, when we continue, I'm going to ask you what you would predict on the basis of what you've seen in terms of the AIDS problem, what you predict across the country when it will come to teenagers. If high schools across the country were able to test youngsters voluntarily, what you think you might see and what you think we're going to see in the course of the next several years. More questions and comments from you. 212-643-0077.
Across the world,
Dr. Starrett and I have been having a little discussion off camera, and I feel it's only fair to have it on camera, and that is that I disagreed a bit with your position, saying that indeed there is a risk for the young man. If it's a risk he chooses to take, then it's a risk he takes. But if it were a female who is, if it's a male who's HIV positive and a female is making that decision, her risk is greater. That AIDS does strike women more efficiently than it strikes males. Yes or no?
In
Yes.
heterosexual relations.
Correct. However, everything is a risk. Getting up in the morning is a risk. Going in a car is a risk.
You know that you used the word, insertee when you were talking with Jennifer before. And that suggests even in homosexual relationships that the one who inserts, if it's anal sex, is at less risk than the one who is inserted into. Is that correct or not? I just think if we're educating, then let's be fair about the mode in which we educate about all of this. And what you've all said is true, that a girl goes to a doctor to learn something about family planning, and she's given birth control pills instead of finding out about condoms.
And you know, we work with gay and lesbian youth as well, and what happens is when we had a young man who went to his doctor, and he was too embarrassed to tell the doctor that he was gay. He was afraid he wouldn't get services. The doctor would tell his parents. And for these youngsters, they're doubly isolated. They're at very high risk because of their behavior, but they don't want to tell anybody because what's going to happen to them if somebody finds out?
Let's go to Karen in New York. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Yes.
I wanted to tell you, Sonia, that I think as often is the case, you are completely correct in feeling that the emphasis should be on abstinence. And I feel that we're just giving into this terrible, terrible problem of immorality and just deciding that the young people cannot be educated to abstain when it's something that's a life and death issue.
Well, the issue of morality may be one issue. I'm not sure it's the issue here. It's the issue of being safe. And all three of our guests, frankly, say that abstinence is not going to work. I mean, Jennifer, you've said that very clearly.
Yes. You can teach about abstinence. You can raise your children to have your beliefs, to carry morality and everything else. But if that child chooses to experiment, even just one time, that child can become infected. Should that experiment cost that child his life?
So the idea is to protect. You can preach abstinence if you believe that morally, but you have a responsibility to protect them
I'm even more
addition.
romantic in the sense of, preaching love first. But you cannot deny that there is a certain amount of peer pressure and a certain amount of experimentation. That's part of growing up.
What do you think we're going to see in the high schools across the country?
I'm sorry.
What do you think we're going to see in the high schools across the country in this issue?
I think that it's going to grow. It's not going to grow as exponentially, as quickly, because you're not going to have, unless you have large parties where everybody is sharing needles, or unless you're having areas where one infected person is having sex with 10 or 15 people, in a short period of time. But basically, you're going to have small people. It's going to occur, and then it's going to continue growing. And I believe in abstinence. I mean, it's not, I'm a moral person, but that does not take away the fact that it happens. And people who do experiment, young children who play doctor, neuropsychologist, are not bad kids.
I think
so
that
you've got to...
Francis has a comment.
In terms of the numbers, first of all, if we think of 1 million teenagers in New York City, and we think of a low estimate of 1% that are HIV positive, 1%, you're talking about 100,000 youngsters. So I think we need to get a sense of, even if it's not as great as we think, that you're talking about a lot of young people. And I also want to say that I deal a lot with young people who are HIV positive, and we had a lovely young man, a gifted child, wonderful poet, a chemist, wonderful young boy who died last year of AIDS. There is nothing more immoral than to watch this young person die because he was not taught about condom use. Nothing more immoral than that.
I want to thank both of you for being with us today, but I want to give a very special thank you to you, Jennifer Michelle. I think to come forward, to expose yourself, to let us see you, and to hear your story. You're very courageous young women. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back.